If my channel is anything to go by, I'm a Thomas the Tank Engine fan. My channel has had very scarce but varied posts around the show, ranging from shit posts to terrible YouTube poops, a crappy discussion video, mixing old Thomas footage with synthwave, and even a Thomas and Friends ASMR that is somehow my most viewed video on this channel with over 2,500 views. Clearly, it's you people that love it because I just did it for a joke. Though I'm tempted to make another one. But for the meantime, I want to take a small detour from my Dark Souls playthrough to talk about something really special with the show, in how it taught me a life lesson that I never really realised until I got older, and the episodes that did this are Series 1 episodes 18, 19 and 20, titled Coal, The Flying Kipper, and Whistles and Sneezes. This is how Thomas and Friends taught me the lesson of, with the right support, you can work just as good, if not better, than others. So at this point in the series, Henry has appeared quite frequently but has had more small appearances than episodes to himself. He had a two-part story where he got shut up in the tunnel for being scared/irritated by the rain, only to redeem himself with the Express after Gordon burst his safety valve. But aside from that, not much else besides playing the role of a side character. It was then revealed to us, however, in Thomas and the Guard, that something was wrong with him and that the others weren't taking much notice, setting up a story that would be told later.
Oh dear, my system is out of order. No one understands my case. You don't know what I suffer, moaned Henry. Rubbish, said Thomas. You're too fat, you need exercise.
After that, he and the rest of the big engines would later go on strike from shunting their own trains, but it was mostly Gordon and James that had speaking roles, until, finally looking to develop on the plot from a few episodes ago, Henry got a 3-episode arc around his illness and how he overcame it. It starts off with Henry feeling very under the weather. Some days he is able to pull trains, but other times he hardly has the strength to move.
I suffer dreadfully, and no one cares.
Engines like James simply brush it off, similar to what Thomas said to him before.
Rubbish, Henry, snorted James. You don't work hard enough.
The Fat Controller is slightly kinder about the whole situation, but is very blunt in the fact that he's tried all the expensive equipment he can think of to get him to work better, to no avail, and that if they can't find a way to fix him, he has to be replaced. The pressure is definitely on for Henry and his driver and fireman, and makes the situation that more dire and realistic. One of the many things that the Reverend Wilbur Audrey, and by extension the classic series, did with their stories was try to make the island of Sodor as realistic of a railway as possible. And in real life, if there's a cheaper option for someone to buy something else rather than fix what they've already got, that's more than likely the option they'll go for. This isn't a happy-lucky-go fantasy land, this is a life situation. So Henry gets ready to take a passenger train, whilst the Fat Controller puts on work overalls to see and hear for himself what exactly is causing the problems. I like that the Fat Controller goes to the extra mile to help solve the problem. He's like a parent, school teacher or boss that checks in on you to see how you're getting on in the workplace. Anyway, Henry tries his best to pull the train, but he just can't build up enough steam, so he has to stop at the station whilst Edward takes the train instead. Henry is feeling at his lowest point here. He tried so hard to work like all the other engines, but his best on his own just isn't enough.
Oh dear, thought Henry, I shall have to go away. Oh dear, oh dear.
Whilst he feels like this, the Fat Controller and his crew discuss his troubles. It seems that what's causing his steaming problems is that his firebox he was built with is too small and can't make the heat necessary to make enough steam. I'm going to go into a bit of a history segment here that explains why Henry has a smaller than necessary firebox. Every engine in the show is based on some kind of real-life engine basis, all except Henry, who was a one-of-a-kind experimental engine. In their version of 1919, an anonymous locomotive designer held a grudge against another designer, Sir Nigel Gresley, the designer of Gordon's basis, the A1 Pacific. This locomotive designer sent a spy to steal drawings from Sir Nigel, and while they were successful in stealing the drawings, they didn't realise that the drawings were for an experimental hybrid of an A1 Pacific and a C1 Atlantic. But by the time they did, the engine was already built, and that engine was who we know now as Henry. As a result, he was built with so many faults and didn't run properly. It was only by tricking the Fat Controller, who was desperate to find engines for his railway at the time, that the locomotive designer was able to convince him to buy Henry. And then from his first moments of stopping in the tunnel on Sodor, the rest we know is history. Anyways, back to the main story. So, with a firebox that's too small and a poor supply of coal, as quoted by the fireman, he suggests that Welsh coal would be a better option for him.
It's expensive, said the Fat Controller, but Henry must have a fair chance. James shall go and fetch some.
This just goes to show how much the Fat Controller cares about his engines. Yeah, he has his moments of authoritarianism and can give a stern word to them for doing things wrong. Sometimes he may even go a little too far, but he cares enough to go to the expense of giving Henry one last and fair chance at showing the railway what he can do. Once the Welsh coal arrives, Henry and his crew are so excited to try it out, and this time they have a plan. The fireman puts large lumps of coal around the outside of his fire like a wall, and uses smaller lumps to cover the glowing part in the middle.
You're spoiling my fire, complained Henry.
I like that while they show Henry is happy to try this coal out, he feels unsure about the changes to his fire, but he still trusts his fireman to help him. And sure enough, Henry is brimming with steam when he reaches the platform ready to start. The Fat Controller stands to do one last check on him before sending him on his way, leading to one of my absolute favourite scenes in the whole series.
No record breaking, warned the Fat Controller. Don't push him too hard. Henry won't need pushing, sir. I'll have to hold him back. Henry had a lovely day. He had never felt so well in his life. He wanted to go fast, but his driver wouldn't let him. Steady, old fellow, he would say. There's plenty of time.
Everything about that scene just makes me want to smile. The grand, triumphantly happy music as Henry puffs along, the simplicity of just watching him being able to pull a train with a big smile on his face, the length of the shots of him leaving the main yard and going into the countryside without slowing down and making him seem unstoppable, and most of all, the fact that on his first journey where he no longer feels ill, Henry doesn't even look around to see if anyone is watching him. He doesn't care if anyone who doubted him before can see him running so well. He doesn't want to show off. All he cares about is pulling the train, gliding through the countryside, and just take it all in how great he feels. That is beautiful. It even ends with him cheekily but satisfyingly getting his own back on Thomas when he arrives earlier than him at the next station.
Where have you been, lazybones? Asked Henry. Oh, I can't wait for dawdling tank engines like you. Goodbye.
Perfection. An excellent story worthy of praise. Now on to the fan favourite and a childhood classic of mine. The special coal is still working wonders for Henry. One winter evening, Henry is told by his driver that tomorrow they'll be up early to take the Flying Kipper, a special goods train loaded with fish from fishing boats that come to the harbour at the big station by the sea. Some of the fish is for the town shops, and the rest is to be sent far away to the mainland. I like the fact that Henry has his own train in the stories, both the books and the show. Not every character in the show has one, believe it or not. Would it shock you if I said that engines like James and Edward don't have any titular trains to their name? What about Donald and Douglas? Or any of the engines on the narrow gauge railway? True, in the books and the show, there have been occasions where other engines have taken the Flying Kipper when Henry couldn't, but overall it's still Henry's train. I like to think of it in the same way I do about Thomas's coaches, Annie and Clarabelle. They are his recognised coaches, but engines like Duck and Percy can still take them if he is unable to. The driver tells Henry that he thinks if they have a successful journey with the train, the Fat Controller will let them pull the express. This means that Henry hasn't just been able to work without feeling ill, but he's earned a chance at pulling a train that is very important to Sodor. He's climbed the ranks and with the right support, is in with a shot of the big leads and is very excited about it.
Hurrah! Cried Henry. That will be lovely.
Henry is up and ready at 5 o'clock ready to take the train. With the last fan loaded and a green lamp shining, he sets off for what is undoubtedly the best sequence of the first series of Thomas and Friends, and one of the best moments of the classic series in general.
Men hustled and shouted, loading the vans with crates of fish. The last door banged, the guard showed his green lamp, the Flying Kipper was ready to go. Come on, don't be silly, puffed Henry to the vans. The vans shuddered and groaned. Trock, trick, all right. That is better, puffed Henry. Clouds of smoke and steam poured from his funnel into the cold air, and the fire's light shone brightly. Hurry, panted Henry.
The sight of Henry pulling the flying Kipper for the first time is gorgeously shot. We're already rooting for Henry to pull the train well because of the last episode, and we know on his journeys he loves to take it all in. Well, in this scene we get to see just what atmosphere Henry is travelling through. The silhouette of Henry and his train against the early morning sunrise through the snow-coated forest with brief puffs of smoke coming from his funnel is my absolute favourite shot to come from Thomas and Friends. It made me fall in love with winter scenery combined with the countryside and forests. Henry is having a wonderful time as everything on this journey is going extremely well. That is, until one moment that would change Henry forever. As Henry heads across the viaduct, they notice a yellow signal ahead, but also see the home signal is down, so decide to continue on. Little do they know that the ice and snow forced that signal down, which should have been set at danger, so they didn't notice that the points from the main line into a siding are frozen. A goods train is waiting on that siding for the flying Kipper to pass. The driver, fireman and guard of that train are drinking cocoa in the brake van and only manage to leave the cab just mere moments before Henry crashes into them, and the result is quite a shocker.
The driver got up. Come on, fireman, back to our engine. They got out just in time.
This, for all intents and purposes, was the first on-screen crash of the entire series. Any accident up to that point was either off-screen or just had an engine getting stuck in the snow or dirt. There are no goofy or wacky visuals to make the crash look cartoony and harmless. No, the brake van and some of the trucks crumble to pieces. The music stops so that we can hear that horrific thud of a giant metal machine fall over, and Ringo Starr doesn't say a word until after the crash has happened. This is not just a serious crash for a steam engine, but doubly so because it's Henry. The fact that they were going so nicely with the train before, the dazed look on Henry's face, and the fact that all the effort and progress he made from using special coal to prove his worth, unless he is repaired, will be wasted. Henry, for a very brief moment, has gone from his highest highs right back down to his lowest low again. He's hit rock bottom, but luckily that's where the Fat Controller comes in. He's decided not just to have Henry fixed, but also give him a new shape and a larger firebox so he won't need to use Welsh coal ever again. Had this been in the last episode, he more than likely wouldn't have gone for such an expensive option and had him replaced. It was Henry's desire not to give up until they found something that helped him work properly and how hard he's worked, that the Fat Controller has decided to give him the reward he deserves. Now, I'm not saying you should work yourself so hard that you have an accident just to get the attention from the higher-ups, because that'd be very damaging. I'm saying the moral is when the help is needed, there are those who will see your worth and will give you that leg up that you need. Henry is rebuilt and returns to Sodor a new engine ready to take on anything. And what job does he have upon his return? Getting to pull the Express. Perfection. Now, I was considering leaving this episode out as, in terms of scale, it doesn't really up the ante compared to the last two and is more of a slice of life episode. But I ultimately decided to include it as it concludes the overall arcing moral message from Cole and the Flying Kipper, and because this story is part of the same book. It's actually told in the book as two separate stories, Gordon's Whistle and Henry's Sneeze. You know, the one where the original publishers had a racist slur? Moving on. So as it turns out, not everyone is happy about Henry's new shape. Gordon, who is presumably still salty over having to share express privileges with Henry, rants about how he doesn't feel like Henry deserves his new shape.
Why should Henry have a new shape, he grumbled. A shape good enough for me is good enough for him. He goes gallivanting off to Crewe, leaving us to do his work, and comes back saying how happy he feels. It's disgraceful. And there's another thing. Henry whistles too much. No respectable engine ever whistles loudly at stations. It isn't wrong, but we just don't do it.
So not only is Gordon completely unaware of the suffering that Henry has had to go through in order to earn his new shape, but he actively tries to make him feel bad about it by complaining about being overworked with his jobs and nitpicking something that doesn't really warrant any insult over at all. Henry then doesn't really feel happy about his return anymore, but Percy is there to soothe his feelings.
Never mind, whispered Percy. I'm glad you're home again. I like your whistling.
Later on, Henry takes a passenger train to Edward Station, and just as Edward helped him out in coal by taking his train when he had no steam, he compliments Henry and says he too is happy to see him back on Sodor.
Hello, Henry, said Edward. You look splendid. I was pleased to hear your happy whistle yesterday. Thank you, Edward, smiled Henry. Shh, shh. Can you hear something? It sounds like Gordon, said Edward, and it ought to be Gordon. But Gordon never whistles like that.
Gordon's whistle valve is jammed in place, causing him to whistle long and loud uncontrollably. In this instance, it's so satisfying to have previously seen Gordon trying to hold himself in a position where he is above Henry, only to be put in an embarrassing situation where everyone is looking at him for the wrong reasons. Once his whistle is fixed and all the engines come back to the shed to see him, they all know the embarrassing situation Gordon is in right now and don't need to say anything at all, because the irony is already clear as day. But that doesn't stop Henry from murmuring an effective comeback.
It isn't wrong, murmured Henry to no one in particular, but we just don't do it. No one mentioned whistles.
The next morning, having got his own back on Gordon, Henry is back to feeling good about himself and just enjoying his work again. He passes some boys standing on a bridge, and that's when something unexpected happens. Instead of waving hello, they drop stones on him and his coaches, which ends up smashing the glass windows and nearly hurting the passengers. Compared to yesterday, this isn't a hurtful use of words that comes from jealousy, but instead nasty behaviour which, while it seems harmless coming from children, is causing trouble to someone's life because they think they can get away with it. Which it does seem that way given the driver doesn't want to call the police, but that's because he has a plan to get their own back. He plans to build up ashes inside Henry's smoke box and release them from his funnel to sneeze at them. I like how a bunch of passengers later gather at the station just before the bridge on Henry's return journey just to see what happens, so they don't even have to go anywhere, they just want to see Henry get his own back. The eventual sneeze itself, while played for laughs, and trust me, the sound Henry makes when he sneezes is very funny. It goes to show that there's ways of getting your own back in small but effective ways. Ending the episode on the moral of even though there are those who will bully you when you overcome your life obstacles, more times than not they'll get what's coming to them. Every fan of the show has at least one favourite character. While there are certain engines that get more attention than others either because they're the titular character or because they're more profitable, which isn't the point but just the way it is, I've always had favourite characters in all sorts of media, and they don't always have to be titular characters. Henry has always been my favourite character from Thomas and Friends. Life is complicated for some people, in some ways more than they can comprehend or explain in words. Perhaps you were born with something out of your control, something that when thrown into a situation where you're expected to work on the same level as others, you might not be able to do so no matter how hard you try, and that's quite damaging because you feel like you're disappointing other people. But little do you know, when the right people are in your life who are willing to go through anything possible to get you to work like others, then under the right circumstances you can do just as good, if not better, than the rest. You'll still have bad days and meet people who will insult you for even trying in the first place, just as everybody does. But chances are they'll learn from their lesson at some point. And you know what? If you start experiencing what everyone else does, that's proof enough to your worth. A show about talking steam engines teaches you this. I'll let that sink in as I end the video remembering the big green engine that taught that lesson in the first place.